Dr. Voyageur, thank you so much for joining us here on APTN InFocus. We're talking about all things women in leadership and prominent roles. So my first question, or it's not really a question I guess, is can you just maybe tell us about some of the things you've been working on in terms of Indigenous women in leadership roles?
Well, I did the first academic study of women leaders, political leaders in Canada, and I'm also now doing a follow-up study, doing a comparison between male and female leaders, the experiences, as well as what the community expects. The differences between the expectations of male and female leaders. So with my first study, I studied women chiefs in Canada, and I followed that up with a study of women councillors in Canada. And with the first study, as I mentioned, there were, very kind of random accounts of women in leadership in the Indigenous community, but there had never been a full academic study. And I interviewed 63 of the then 90 women chiefs in Canada and found some very interesting information about them. For example, about 3/4 of them had some form of post-secondary education, which was very high at that time because post-secondary education in the First Nation community was running about 40%. So this was a very educated group. They were also, 3/4 of these women were from what I call politically involved families. So they came from political families within the reserve community. And what I also found was that they felt that they were less likely to be a charismatic leader than males. And also the types of duties that they were given and the expectations that they had was that they were expected to deal with what I called soft issues, child care, elder care, education, social services within the community, whereas they felt at that time that they were expected, not necessarily expected, to deal with hard issues like economic development, housing, those types of things.
So how has that sort of changed in the women that you interviewed? What have you learned, and how has it changed over the years from when you first did it to maybe a little more recently?
More recently, there seems to be more of an acceptance of women leaders. There was some resistance at the beginning. I found that there was an expectation that leaders in the community were going to be male. And of course, this tied specifically to the Indian Act, because we know that women were not allowed to participate in meetings, political meetings, and they were not allowed to stand for office or vote in band elections until 1951. So there was a bit of resistance, and some of the women said that, community members and elders, resisted them and said that they didn't believe that women should be chief. Well, and now this has changed.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off there. So the first female chief was elected in the 1950s, and yes. I'd love to get your perspective on how maybe things have changed since then, given all the work you've done on female chiefs specifically. So, like I just mentioned, the first chief in the 1950s, and there's more now, which is great to see. Mm-hmm. But I'm just wondering, in that time frame, maybe what were some of the difficulties and how everything has sort of changed leading up to our current day.
Okay. From when the first woman chief was elected, Elsie Knott, at Curve Lake in Ontario, for that decade, that first decade, there was about 10 women chiefs across Canada. What we have found now is that about 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 chiefs in Canada are women. Most of the women chiefs are in British Columbia, and as we know, there are about 1/3 of the First Nations in Canada are in British Columbia, who seem to be very progressive and very willing to elect women to deal with issues that they are dealing with in their communities. So, having to deal with industry, in forestry, fisheries, mining, those types of issues. And what I found was that there was an increase in the number of women chiefs from 45 to 90 in the 1990s, and there was a leveling off, and now there seems to be, the numbers are creeping up again.
And Dr. Voyageur, what are some of the challenges a woman faces when it comes to maybe running an election or after being elected as chief? I mean, have you seen anything or heard anything? I know you mentioned sometimes they're relied on for maybe the softer issues, right? So just curious about that angle as well.
What I found was that women were still expected to deal with family issues. Many of these women were middle-aged women, so they had children, grandchildren, as well as perhaps aging parents, and they were what I called a member of the sandwich generation. So they were kind of the meat in the sandwich and expected to deal with a lot of issues. So not just within their family, but also within their community. People were expected to, or chiefs were expected to, also deal with, if there's a crisis in the community, they are expected to, come forward with that, and not so much in the way that men were. I mean, women are expected to, help cook for a feast, or, help cook for a wake, and these types of things, and that wasn't something that was expected of men. And what we also found was that the female relatives of the men were more likely to help them with their duties than they were the women. And also what the women found was that a lot of the social support that they had within their community kind of fell away when they took that leadership role. And they had to work very hard to be seen as not changing as a result of power. And with men, that wasn't necessarily so.
And I just want to move, still on the same topic, but moving away from the female chiefs for a second. What are you seeing in terms of other women taking prominent leadership roles, whether it be in business or like another sector? What have you seen in that regard, Dr. Voyageur?
Well, this past year, we have seen some really big, situations where women have moved into leadership roles. Of course, we have Mary May Simon, who is our Governor General. We have Roseanne Archibald, who was elected to the national chief role for the Assembly of First Nation. And now we have an Indigenous woman on the Supreme Court of Canada, Michelle Obamsawin. So, women are really moving forward. We have also a woman who is the leader of the First Nation University of Canada in Regina, Jackie Ottman. So we have women moving into very prominent roles in our society. And that doesn't surprise me at all, because what we know with women is that they are more likely to be educated than men. Generally, what we've seen is about a 3-to-1 ratio of degree attainment for women. And I see this as a result of women more likely to have, more likely to be single parents, leading single parent households. And the type of jobs that women do are not well-paying jobs. So about 1/3 of our employed population are what we would call tertiary positions, sales and service. But also, what we also know is that 1/3 of our female population, employment population, are in administration, business, and finance. Right. So those two are leveling each other out.
And Dr. Voyageur, I'd love to get your opinion on this next question here. Why is it important to see Indigenous women taking on these leadership roles, whether it be a female chief or moving into a political role or having their own business or just anything like that? Like, why is it so important that these women are taking on these leadership roles?
Well, I think it's important because women have always played an important role traditionally in our society. And it was when Europeans' contact happened that they were essentially taken taken out of that role and supplanted by men. And this was European influence. And what happened in many communities was that the acceptance of those outside rules in our community meant that women were officially taken out of those positions. But as we know, unofficially, women were very much in ask for their advice and those types of things. And, women are very much the administrators within our communities, and they have, their finger on the pulse of what's going on in the community. They know, where the challenges are, they know where the strengths are, and I think it's important for them to be in those leadership roles because they have a sense of what's going on in the community.
And before we let you go here, Dr. Voyageur, where do you see the number of women in leadership roles going? Do you see it going up, maybe staying the same? Or like, what do you see in terms of the future of women in leadership?
I see the numbers going up. As I mentioned before, there was a doubling of the numbers until the mid-1990s. Then there was a plateau, and then they started creeping up again. So I can see this number going up.
Well, that's certainly great to hear. We'll have to leave it there, Dr. Voyageur, but I want to say a big thank you, miigwech, to you for taking some time out of your day and sharing your perspectives and your insight into what we're talking about with women in leadership roles, Indigenous women in leadership roles. So a big thank you, miigwech, to you for joining us.
Masicho.